Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, The History of Nightclubs and Architainment with Marsha Stern. My name is Mallory Misnarsic and I'm the project manager here at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and she will try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Marsha, the presenter for today's webinar. Marsha is a lighting designer, programmer, technician, and production manager. Her career spans the New York City nightclub and special event circuits from the late 70s through the mid-90s, when she began pioneering the use of entertainment technologies in architectural lighting design, now known as Architainment. And now I'll pass it over to you, Marsha.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for joining us and for tuning in. Firstly, I would also like to thank Harman and the Martin Learning Workshop sessions for putting these wonderful sessions together. This series has been certainly wonderful throughout the pandemic, but since it's on YouTube, it's there for posterity and a great learning tool for anybody at any time. So thank you very much. Also to Brad Schiller, Mallory Misnarsic, Heather Bush, Laura Lawrence, and the entire team at Martin. You guys have been full of support and guidance through day one, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. Lastly, to everyone watching this presentation, whether you're attending it live or viewing it on YouTube, I'm grateful for your interest and thank you from the bottom of my heart. As Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And for me, the beginning was in the summer of 1976 when I moved to New York City from Florida to pursue a career in the music industry. After being in New York City for a few months, I got my first break working as a publicist for the Howard Bloom organization, which at that time was located in a building that also contained TK Records and Can't Stop Productions in Midtown Manhattan at 65 East 55th Street. I did publicity for a number of artists, including the TK Records artists, the Ritchie family. I'm sorry, people, I'm a little nervous here. Including the TK Records artist, the Ritchie family, which was one of my PR assignments as we did a big party for them at Studio 54. And that was really my entree into the world of disco. As a publicist, then working as a music producer, working with Can't Stop Productions, again working with Areola Records as an East Coast disco promoter, and finally with the Joe Long Sound and as a music producer, doing a number of notable disco records, including the top 10 charting My Baby's Baby for Parachute Casablanca Records. Around the late 70s and early 80s, my career began to overlap as I was DJing and also began picking up lighting, doing lighting in a number of different clubs, and really while at the same time I was working in music, and then it ultimately slid into just lighting in the early 80s. One of the first things I'd like to say about nightclubs in New York City was that they were really a breeding ground in the late 70s for cultural marriages, I could say. There was just about any type of music, art, fashion that was overlapped from a myriad of clubs that were available to all of us in the city. We could do rock, we could do high-end hoity-toity, we could do downtown Lower East Side Mud Club and avant-garde. There were amazing overlaps, and it was such a culturally free and prolific period in New York history. I was very grateful to have been there and been a part of it. And while I say my career was predominantly in the music business in the 70s, it did have a lot of overlap into lighting and general production and the social trends at the time. The first club I actually worked in and pushed lights for money was the Cock Ring. And it was out of fun, as some of my best friends and DJs were spinning there. And it was a very nominal fee and all the liquor I could drink for the night, but I worked there during the week. And the thing that was very odd, and why do I have a picture of a typewriter? Because those of you that may not be familiar with an old-fashioned typewriter, I wanted to illustrate the lighting system. And Tommy Kozalka, who was the lighting director and a very brilliant engineer at the time, devised a lighting control console, if you will, from the guts of a typewriter. And this is basically the guts of the inside of the typewriter. And as you can see, it was very much push a button, get a light. And he had these keys rigged so that each time you depressed a key, and there were only about half of the letters that were on the keyboard at the time, but when you pushed a letter, it went to a relay that hid a variety or combination of pin spots and other effects that were over the dance floor. At that time, predominantly pin spots that lit mirror balls and columns within the room, etc. And so that was literally the first lighting console that I worked on, a transformed Olivetti typewriter keyboard. The first real job, I call it, that I had was at a very high-end club called New York, New York in Manhattan. It was right next to the Jockey Club. It was on 52nd Street. And that was where I actually had lighting consoles, and it was what I call my first disco experience. And I worked at that club. I also was familiar with and worked a little bit at the Ice Palace 57 in New York City. And this was owned by a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Merry. The Lumen Award that you see on the left was given to him for the Ice Palace 57, of which these two photographs are from. That was opened in 1977, right around the time Studio 54 opened. And that Lumen Award was given to me when we closed his last club, the Red Parrot, just before he passed, and more about that later. The other club that Jimmy opened and started actually in the early 70s was on Fire Island, the Ice Palace Cherry Grove. And here you have a photograph of the rafters of the room, and you can see the lighting in there is a little more antiquated, though they did add some neon bolts up into the rafters. And I have a picture on the left of a DJ, Roy Thode, a dear friend of mine, but I'm circling what was the Light Lab 16-channel controller, and you can see where the lighting person was just adjacent to the DJ in that shared space that was the DJ booth. It led for wonderful, wonderful communication and camaraderie, really speechless exchange of energy between the lighting people and the music maker that set the tone and the melody for the entire evening and really set the tone of the party. If the DJ was having a good time, chances are pretty good that you were having a good time too. Here's a close-up of some of the Light Lab gear. It's important to note that Focus's Paul Gregory, lighting designer Paul Gregory, at that time in the late 70s headed the New York City office of Light Lab. And Light Lab was probably one of the most preeminent lighting control companies of the day. They were probably most famously known for their dance floor that was created for Saturday Night Fever, the movie, the lit dance floor. These are a sampling of a lot of their controllers. And not every club used them, but certainly it was a ubiquitous controller throughout the nightclub and disco scene, as were these strobes, Diversitronics. Pretty much every club had at least one, if not many, Diversitronic strobes. They were great because from the adjustment control, you could adjust the rate and the intensity. So you really did have a myriad of effects that you could pull from that. Studio 54, probably one of the best known clubs, I'm going to say, in all of history, certainly given recent years. I've thrown in a number of pictures to give you an idea, again, of the proximity of the lighting person and the DJ. Bobby DeSilva is the lighting guy in this picture to the left. They did not really use much Light Lab equipment. They had a lot of other equipment around, and I really didn't do lights there. The famous years of Studio 54 in the 70s, the Ian Strager and Steve Rebell years, those were my years in the music business. And you can see that the booth was never empty. There was rare, and I've taken a close-up on the lower right-hand corner of my friend Roy Thode, who also was one of the main DJs at Studio 54, and the back of Bobby DeSilva, the lighting guy, who you can see they're close, but they're not, there's certainly a separation of equipment and space. However, when you look at these pictures, you can see that in a booth that really should have held 2 or 3 people, you sometimes had upwards of 10 and 15 people, maybe even 20 crammed in. Not to mention people like Diana Ross and Steve Rubell standing within inches of the DJ's turntables. And so it was quite an interesting environment. It certainly was very unique, and it made for a really unique perspective to stand above on the balcony and look in at all of these celebrities in the DJ booth that were up there to kind of look at the fishbowl of the dance floor and also have attention laid on them. Every now and again, someone would throw on a song and Diana would go up and they'd hand her a microphone, and sure enough, she'd sing right to the music. And Steve Rubell was always famous for breaking in and giving his little introductions to whichever celebrities or saying thank you to the crowd. So it was a very, very active booth, probably the most unique of that kind of any club I've ever been involved with. Other clubs I was involved with was Bonds Times Square in New York City, and I bring this up because it was also unique in that there was no lighting controller. My control console was a series of relay switches, just regular on-off toggle switches that were attached to relays that were mounted on a framework of 2x4s. That's right, there was no lighting console. In fact, the toggle switches weren't even covered with faceplates, and there were times when it was so hot and sweaty, the sweat would drip off my hands and hit the metal surrounding the toggle switch, and I would get a little shock. There also were very small windows that were in the booth at Bonds, one for the DJ, one for the lighting person, so you really didn't have intimate contact with the crowd. I don't know if you can see from this photograph of the club, but up in the upper left-hand corner, all the way to the left, was basically a huge garage door opener and the entrance to the DJ booth, which, aside from housing the DJ, the lighting person, the dancing waters, and our controllers, and the laser person and controllers, we also had a blimp. It was like a 20-foot by 10-foot blimp that was housed in the DJ booth. That was our hangar. And a few times a night, we'd lift the garage door opener and fly the booth around, and that also was part of my responsibilities as lighting tech. The toggle switches released a myriad of effects and inflatables that came out of the ceiling and did all kinds of other strange things, so it really wasn't a control system that we would know today. And please remember, these were the days of analog. We were still in the push a button, get a light mode. One of the unique things about Bonds was that when it was built, they took the smoke ring blowing machine from the Camel's cigarette sign that was located as a billboard up on the corner of 45th and Broadway, which is where Bonds at that time was a clothing store, was located. And that became the smoke machine inside the club. So when I would turn it on, I would see billows of smoke puffs that would come out from that old smoke machine that was a billboard at one time. Little bit of history there. Another club that was historic and odd by nature was the Limelight. Peter Gation came to New York in the early 80s, and he converted a church into a rather amazing space that still exists on one level or another today. Again, one of the interesting and odd things about that club is that the DJ was up on the 3rd floor with their backs to the crowd, and the lighting person, I, was kind of around the corner, so that I was really looking at the organ chimes, and again, not the crowd or even the lighting that I was producing. So it was really kind of a weird setup technically, but people came and they had fun, and I guess that's all that matters, right? The Paradise Garage was a very unique place. It was a private club, only open on Fridays and Saturdays, members and their guests. And as you can see from the photo on the left, a fairly innocuous front. It was a converted parking garage. The other photograph shows lines of people lining up that ramp that you would otherwise have driven your car up to park your car, waiting to get into the Paradise Garage. And I bring up the Paradise Garage because that was my first lighting installation. They did a redesign, I believe, late 79, early 80. At the time, I was working at Light Lab, and Chris Harms, who was a lighting designer, actually the lighting designer who got the Lumen Award for his design at the Ice Palace 57 for Jimmy Murray. He was working as a Light Lab liaison in the lighting redesign of the Paradise Garage, which was led by Joe Zamor. He was the LD in charge. And it was my first time on an installation crew. And it was really quite an amazing 2 weeks. We went in after the club closed on Sunday and began taking everything down. And one of my first tasks was, as I was pointed to a pile of Par 56s that were new, that were going to be installed on the new lighting rings we were putting up in the room. And I was told to please put Edison plugs, clean them up and put Edison plugs on all. And I turned around to Chris, or it might have been Chip Bullock, who was at that time lighting director of the club. And I said, well, if you tell me what an Edison plug is and you show me how to put it on, I'll be happy to do them. And that was really how I learned how to be a technician. That's really where I learned my basis of hands-on electrical wiring, how things pull together, and it was really learning by example and the good graces of many people who were willing to share their knowledge with me. The thing that was interesting about those 2 weeks was that the first week the club had, after we were finished with our setup, the club had 0 lights in it. There were no lights. There was no light show, yet they were open on Friday and Saturday. And being a private member club, they could do pretty much what they wanted. There were about 6 or 8 sconces that were in the wall. Obviously, the exit lights, the emergency lights were there. But every member and dancer that came in that evening was given either a flashlight or a hard hat with a miner's light on the front. And they were the light show. So for that in-between weekend, the people were actually the light show, which was one of the most unique parties I've ever attended. And then, of course, come Sunday mid-morning, we began putting up the new lights, and the following Friday, we debuted the new lighting system. The Saint was also kind of a landmark club in its design. It opened in September of 1980 in the space of the old Fillmore East downtown. It was another club that was built in a theater, though it didn't use theatrical pulls and props in the way that Studio 54 did. What they did was they built a structure, a dome structure, literally a geodesic dome inside the Fillmore, where I suppose the orchestra and lower mezzanine levels would have been. The original balcony of the concert hall was retained, and that was the balcony. And from the balcony area, you could look through this geodesic dome and see the light show and see the people below. But when you were inside the dome, as you can see from the photographs, it acted as a reflective surface. One of the things that was also very unique at the time to the Saint, excuse me, was a star machine that was built by Greg Ackerman, and it mimicked the star machine that was in the Hayden Planetarium. And it was a little like driving an airplane, actually. You had axis and tilts and longitudes and latitudes and all kinds of things. And you could operate either hemisphere individually or simultaneously. And it was really quite interesting. As you can see from the photographs, the one on the right is kind of hard to see, but that is a photograph of the star machine in action. I broke ground at the Saint along with DJ Sharon White, as we were the first females to be put on the performance schedule and advertised on the performance schedule. For those of you that don't know, the Saint was opened as a private gay club, members and their guests only, and an extremely strict policy. That policy, well, I remember being at the door one day when Liza Minnelli and her entourage decided they wanted to come into the Saint. And since they were not on the guest list, they were politely told that they could not. And they were not happy, but they did leave. In the summer of 1980, the Pines Pavilion was opened out on Fire Island. And in the fall of 1980, I was asked to come in and be their new tech director. And I was also told that I needed to design lighting because all the lighting that they put in that first summer was rented. And I thought about it, and I went to my dear friends, my mentor, Mark Ackerman, who was the lighting director, technical director at the Saint, and Chip Bullock, who was the LD/TD at Paradise Garage. And with their support and their guidance, I was able to say yes to the job, and the Pines Pavilion, Fire Island Pines, became my first lighting design ever and the first permanent installation at that club. In fact, the electrical and most of the control endured for about 12 years after I did the installation. These two photographs here were taken from, I think, 1989 or 90, when I was doing lights one night with Robbie Leslie, who's in the background. And if you look at the photo on the left, the entire bank of lighting equipment that is behind my head and back was the original bank that I put in. The first design where I was running a lighting console used to be video, as we originally had video in the club. And you can see that there are a few other types of lighting controls, but predominantly, again, Light Lab. That was kind of the thing for the day. Again, in the winter, I believe I think it was New Year's Eve of 80 or 81, the Red Parrot opened up in New York City. And the Red Parrot was Jimmy Murray's latest enterprise. And things that were very unique about the Red Parrot, in and of itself, it was offering a different format. Jimmy Murray was a big fan of swing music. He had hired Ken Billington as his lighting designer. Up to that point, Ken Billington really was most famous, and still, I believe, is most famous for his work on Broadway. And Ken brought to the table something that was unique in nightclubs. Our control equipment was a Kliegel Performer 2. That was, I believe, the first computerized control equipment with macros that was ever installed in a nightclub. So we really pushed the envelope and broke the ceiling on that. And my big thanks to Ken for his insight and for bringing these elements into nightclubs and disco. Ken also got Wybron to make for him the first 6 of the color scrollers that we know Wybron has been very famous for. And it broke a lot of ground. The club also had a live sound stage, which unfortunately you don't see in this photograph. Both the photographs with the blue floor, the entranceway, and the one to the right there, they're showing the back of the club, standing from the dance floor entrance area looking to the back. If you look at the photograph with the blue floor, where my cursor is, up in the top left-hand corner is a cage, a box, that was where our front of house mixer was, and that cage would slide down. On the dance floor, there was a bandstand that had all DI boxes and all the wiring complete, so that any band of any size, all they had to do was just plug right into the stage. There was no build a stage for a show like we had to do at many other clubs. It also had a riser for the conductor's platform that we could lift up about 6 feet into the air. There was an entrance to the stage. The stage itself actually floated above the floor, and while the bandstand was built in as part of the technical area, the stage itself was raised, and we would lower it for shows along with a ramp from the upstairs catwalk where artists could make their entrance from the dressing room in the upstairs, walking down the stairs to the stage that had just been lowered. To much fanfare, light show. We would use songs like, perhaps the William Tell Overture or other very dramatic pieces of music to make really a show of setting up the stage and lowering the stage for the show. There were a lot of celebrities that came in. You can maybe recognize Malcolm Jamal Morton with me on the bottom photo, and DJ Robbie Leslie and I when we did a New York New Year's Eve party. And the next photo on top is Kelly, our monitor mixer, myself in the middle, and Kevin Cahill, God rest his soul. Kevin was our technical stage manager at the time. And this is a little close-up I was able to pull of the internet of my lighting controller. I would say one of the most, the challenges I had to overcome initially was the delay factor. I had come from a world of pretty much instantaneous, push a button, get a light. Now, I would call up a cue, hit enter, and there was a delay. So my musical cues, if I input them in time with the music, were late. So I had to now learn to anticipate the delay and put that into my execution of the cues so that the cues would execute in time with the music and not after the fact. It was a skill that became very useful. He came in very useful when I moved to the Palladium. Excuse me, I did want to make one mention back, and that was to the bands and to the music at the Red Parrot. And Jimmy Merry did something that really no other club had done at that time, and he integrated big band music and swing music into the disco. And we had our own band. We had Joe Kane and the Red Parrot Orchestra. We had a few other bands, and one of the regular performers was a wonderful, wonderful band, Stan Rubin's orchestra. And I would just like to read you these words from Stan Rubin, who was one of the bands that performed regularly. And it's Stan's words: "My dream was to create the band, preserve the concept of music by virtue of note-for-note arrangements of the great classics, and play in a large New York nightclub 6 nights a week with permanent band members who had steady jobs complete with benefits. The closest I came was the Red Parrot from 1981 to 1988, which had a capacity of 2,500 people. They had a disc jockey, but Jimmy Merry, the owner, loved swing, and we were there 4 nights a week doing 3 half-hour shows. It was the best job I ever had, and I loved it. The kids came to hear the disc jockey, and they stayed and listened to us." That was a really unique aspect of the Red Parrot. And I must say, Jimmy Merry was a very unique club owner. He had insight, compassion, and he really gave everyone who worked for him the ability to believe that they were making a difference in other people's lives as we spread joy. And he appreciated us for what we did, which only made us work harder for him. And for that, I will always be indebted to Mr. Merry. He was a model. I wish there were more of him around. God rest your soul, Jimmy. While I was working at the Red Parrot, I began working day crew at the Palladium shortly after it opened. In fact, my first job at the Palladium was striking the MTV Music Awards show that had been broadcast there the night before, featuring Tina Turner. One of the things that was also notable about the Palladium, it too broke envelopes. We had the first permanent installation of Verilights. Up to that point, Verilights were, and for many years after, were only available as rentals, touring lights, rock and roll bands. It really did change the industry. And again, I was very, very lucky to be involved with the Palladium at that time, and to then be privy to all of the wonderful technology that came about. Now, we have a little video that I found online, which was actually made in 1987 by a British interviewer. It's called Palladium Beyond 2000, and I've got the web address for the full video up at the top of the screen, but unfortunately, due to some technical complications with playing a video of this length, we had to edit it down, so I'm just going to give you a few little snippets of the Palladium in action, and then I'll get a little more descriptive. We've got an upshot of the Verilights. These are VL1s, first generation. Our video arrays, which again were the first time anything was ever done of that magnitude. Those push buttons, that's the Verilight console with the AVO board next to it, and those are the push buttons. That was pre-Artisan for anybody who knows Verilights. We've got our video arrays, and run by a really amazing video person, Tima Sermeliu. I don't know if Tima's on this call or not, but I think she was going to come, and you saw a snippet of Tima's hand in that video as well. But she was our video person. And as I'll point to you on these pictures, you can see very clearly the picture on the left is taken from the 27 rail bar, the upstairs bar, facing the brick wall. The Keith Haring piece is being shown. Behind that is some neon array, which is actually on the brick wall of the building. And if any of you ever saw the movie Bright Lights, Big City, in the opening segment, there is a couple of blips of the video wall, which I actually programmed for that film as they were filming there back in 80 whatever. The video rays, these two video rays, each moved independently of one another. They would go up and down. You could spin them around. You could almost give them a full 240-degree tilt. You could give them tilts and pans. They were really rather remarkable in and of themselves. And they had the ability, we had a regular switching mechanism, just like TV switchers, where you could have a variety of contents. We actually also had live feed. And that was a whole department in and of itself. The DJ then had their own area, and out from the DJ booth came the AVO light console, which were all the conventional lights. So all these lights, these red and blue lights that you see on the walls, across the top, you can maybe see a little bit of what are some lights and parkans from the top. All the conventionals were run through the AVO light console, and the Verilight VL1 console ran all of the Verilights, and at that time there were 72 in the room. We had the old theatrical fly rail system that moved the props, and believe me, there were a lot of cuts and drops. And we had humans, usually 2 humans, that were our fly rail operators. And in the upper grid, which was in the second picture, above kind of the second half of the room, we had an automated grid system that was a Clancy, J.R. Clancy system that automatically would move the Verilight trusses up and down. This array in the center that you see was the header for our Queen's Disco set piece, and those were manual. So you had a combination throughout the length of the club of manual and automated through the Clancy system. Here's a close-up of 2 of the VL1s, our AVO QM500, and some of our tech crew. On Thursday nights we would do Latin night, and our tech crew that you can see, our fly rail operator, video, myself, Verilight, and AVO light operators. I moved to special events in the early 90s. After I left the Palladium in the summer, pushing to the summer of 1991. And I worked predominantly with Robert Isabel, who was, again, an amazing artist and event planner. He was probably best known for doing over-the-top events like the 200th anniversary of the New York Stock Exchange and the 150th anniversary of the New York Philharmonic. We did Whitney Houston's wedding. He did the Kennedy Schlossberg wedding, a number of other events. And Robert embraced Verilights, and we were actually the largest renter of Verilights in the Northeast at that time, going through Vanco, Teddy Van Bevel's company, Vanco, that were the vendors for Verilight at that time. And that was really quite a statistic for a special events company to hold. Now, you might ask yourself, what does all this have to do with Architainment and architectural lighting, or any of the above? And, well, how did I get into architecture, and what does theatrical lighting have to do with architecture? Well, I would say in part, if not in earnest, I believe that Architainment owes its existence to rock and roll lighting, because it was rock and roll technology that really brought robotics and automated lighting to the forefront, a la Verilight and their invention for Genesis in 1980. In the mid-90s, by the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, we had Broadway now embracing this technology with shows like Starlight Express that utilized Verilights and utilized projection technologies that, like the rock opera Tommy for The Who, when that was on Broadway, they utilized technologies that before had really been rock and roll technologies, big concert production technologies. And if it wasn't for those advancements that were made in entertainment, I don't believe we would have Architainment as we know it today. So back to the question, how did I get in the middle of this? Well, in the mid-90s, I blew my knee out skiing. And after 2 years of rehab and subsequent surgeries, I was clear I wasn't going to be climbing ladders anymore. So I followed an ad in the Times to an architectural lighting design firm that was looking for a new designer. And it was a firm by the name of Johnson Schwinghammer. Bill Schwinghammer and Clark Johnson interviewed me and told me about some of the projects that they were working on, notably the Mondrian Hotel in Los Angeles, FAO Schwarz in Las Vegas, and a showroom for Calvin Klein on Madison Avenue. And with my background, and they took a chance on me and they hired me, and I became responsible for all of the special lighting, the specialty lighting as we called it in FAO Schwarz. And it was, I will forever be grateful to Bill and Clark, not only for their ability to see the future in their designs in the architectural world, but for their trust in me and allowing me to bring a new medium to their attention, and they're trusting me with it as we did things that had almost never been done before. One of the first designs I did for them that opened was the Mondrian Hotel in West Hollywood, California. And I was very privileged to have worked with Philippe Starck on what he called his light painting wall. And those are the few pictures of the same with different colors. We used theatrical fixtures. They were actually from Italy. There were a few other elements of the hotel that I also was involved in. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see template, which was a carpet of light, and we had utilized the then new little mini ellipsoidal fixture from Altman. There were a few theatrical elements we could throw into the club, but what we did need to do was have a completely separate control system. While the club, the hotel was run on a Crestron overall dimming system, at that time, the architectural world did not know about DMX. So there was no DMX interface in the Crestron system. We had to be completely independent on our own. While the first design I did with Johnson Schwinghammer was FAO Schwarz, it was the longest to complete, and about 1.5 years later, it finally opened in Las Vegas to much falderall, as you can see, and much celebration. It was something that really had never been done before. We had this huge 65-foot animated Trojan horse that stood at the entrance, as you can see from these two photographs, half out into the Caesars Forum Shops area and public spaces, and then the tail end of it into the store. And it was quite amazing. It was at that job that I met Brad Schiller. He was my programmer for that job. We were using then beta versions of High-End Systems Studio Color, and we were programming on a status queue. And I must say, if it wasn't for the fact that there was so much advanced technology and animation throughout the store, that FAO Schwarz had their own animation team and maintenance team on board, I don't think we would have been able to do this job. They were able to have someone who resided or who was a full-time worker at the store, who was able to keep an eye on what we knew were constantly moving fixtures that needed constant attention and maintenance. And he went down to Austin and was trained by High-End, and you know, it was this trust and this kind of marriage, the beginning of trying to figure out how you could get theatrical effects and theatrical fixtures to work in an architectural environment. They were going to live there for years. Instead of having a 100-hour lamp life, you were looking at 10,000-hour lamp lives, and those just didn't exist back then. We didn't even have entertainment companies doing architectural fixtures at that time. We were using architectural fixtures. In the dome at the top, I wanted to use a broad cyc, because the broad cyc, in fact, let me go back and show you where I'm speaking of. The blue ceiling is this dome inside. All around the perimeter of this, we wanted to illuminate it, and I needed to get a good broad coverage of a wash that had some punch, and the only way I could get that was from a cyc, and the only cyc wash that was acceptable was theatrical and way too large for the confined space. And so L&M Electronics in upstate New York, they had built for me a custom fixture that was the first architectural baby broad cyc that it was ETL listed for this installation. And we had to do that with a lot of things because the technology just didn't exist. These are some of the areas of the toy store which were very, very whimsical in nature. The clock tower, the trademark clock tower of FAO Schwarz. We had the Monopoly coffee bar. There was Jurassic Park area. The two photos on the bottom of the Star Wars area. There was a lot of whimsy. I was commissioned to predominantly work on the front entrance, Trojan horse and animation, the Star Wars area, and the barrel vault, as we called it, which was leading into FAO Schwarz, their candy store. And we had programmed all of this neon so that you could use the neon to draw people in to that little store that was kind of at the back. So this was a real eye grabber. There was a tree for all of the bears, all the Gunt bears. And it was a wonderful tree house. And we wanted to have fireflies flickering in the tree house. I was actually able to use a pilot's indicator light, which literally a traffic stop light that could take the joke of being turned on and off and on and off and on and off, and used a flicker controller that we kind of had to fool into randomly flickering these fireflies throughout. So it didn't look like they were on off, but I wanted it to look like nature. I wanted it to look like random firefly flicks. And the fact that I was able to work with such an amazing team that let me do these things. There were animation sequences to the Trojan horse. There was about a 15-minute musical script that these guys fired off to, and then we had about 20 minutes of intermission music and just nice slow color changes. And then we went to a repeat of this show. And as you can see, we had lots of doors and features that opened up. We had, I guess this was Brunhilde, the operatic cow. And we have the wacky eyeball and the mouse that comes out of the top. We had dancing Barbies. We had another Faye and King Kong that came out of the side, and all of this went with a soundtrack that was choreographed the animation was choreographed to the soundtrack, and then our lighting cues, of course, were choreographed to that soundtrack, and that went off about 3 or 4 times an hour, which was, again, an element that we really had never seen in retail before. It was kind of Disney. I also have to thank the amazing team, our programmer and friend to this day, Brad Schiller. Joanne Newbold in the center of this center picture here. She was the creative designer and really the inspiration and brains and design for all the artistic inspiration for these. And Dick Glass, who was the vice president of store development, who trusted us and gave us the platform to be as creative as we could be as he tried to break new ground in retail. Another retail design I did with Johnson Schwinghammer, again, leaning back to high-end systems. On this one, I used their studio spot, and this was the NBA store on Fifth Avenue. In fact, I believe we had techno beams in this as well. Yes, I thought so. We had studio spots in the window, techno beams in the inside, and this was another example of how we had to use theatrical equipment in a retail setting. I did a design in Paris for Louis Vuitton. This was predominantly a Bill Schwinghammer job, and at the time I was using the then new AR5 fixture from Iridian. Iridian was still a Dallas-based company. It was part of Verilight. It was their foray into the architectural world. A couple of years before, they had introduced the AR500, which was a large exterior fixture. The smaller AR5 interior fixture was what I had specified for this job. The software that we used at the time was called Composer. And I remember many a time standing at the phone booth on the corner of Champs-Élysées and Charles Cinq Boulevard, calling Dallas for tech support help in some of the oddest hours because of the time difference. But it was really quite something. You literally had to go to a payphone with a lot of coin to get your technical questions answered. Needless to say, we did not have the internet then as we have it today. In between Johnson Schwinghammer and April of '99, when I established myself as Marsha Stern Lighting Design and Consulting, I also worked with Steve Brill in the Lighting Design Group and worked with them on some projects like the NASDAQ MX market site. I designed the television studio lighting within that. I was one of the peripheral consultants on the Good Morning America studios and a few other jobs. And Steve graciously also let me keep some freelance work. And I was contracted in March of 1999 by Dick Glass at FAO Schwarz to work with them on their newly revised area they were building in New York City. And this was going to be a new Star Wars area. We were just coming out with the Phantom Menace. They were building a new area in their New York flagship store to help announce the movie. Previously, Joanne Newbold, the designer, had worked with Lucasfilms and Lucas Studios and been to the ranch, and they were right beside us on this as well, giving us access to costumes and just some amazing access to the Star Wars archive so that we could build this little fantasy area. And I was able to work with some spaceship fabricators that Dick had hired. I'm sure they did a lot of work for Disney because they were just outside of Orlando and Sanford. And I went down there and worked with them on the fabrications of these spaceships. We used elements like data flashes, which are the red in the back of this spaceship, as you see. I had my neon designer, Pat Nash, work with me on putting bolts of neon in to simulate the electrical between the ships. This perspective shows you there were a myriad of ships, and these perspectives show you how this all was on the ceiling. We had a number of, again, the Altman mini ellipse, MR16 mini ellipse, and I used, again, the AR5 fixtures. Only the difference was now if they were part of ETC. ETC had purchased the Iridian line. Composer software became what is now known as Mosaic. At the time it was Pharos, but it is now known as Mosaic, which is exclusive to USA and ETC. And the Iridians did retain their names. But that was kind of interesting because it was the same fixture, but working through and with another company. These are a couple of other photos of some of the areas where you could see using the colored lighting, which sort of changed the complexion. There was no real soundtrack to this, like there was with FAO Schwarz Las Vegas. So what I did was try to create a bit of kinetic movement, but nothing that was too jarring, more subtle, so that people who would come into the area and look around might get a change of scene, or some people who would go to the area and then go to another area and come back to it would see something different. It was, again, the changing of retail a bit. Another project that, then you can send one more picture of this huge creature. I'm not a real Star Wars geek, so forgive me if I don't know the names of the creatures, guys. Another area that Dick Glass had me work with was the Nickelodeon area they put up on the main floor in their Fifth Avenue store. And that particular installation I did with the new Martin Minimac fixtures. Excuse me. I was contracted to do the lighting design for an amazing project of a new restaurant going up in the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. It was called Warner Brothers Stage 16. I had the great pleasure to work with Ed Strang, who was not only the art director for this project, but he was the art director at Warner Brothers Studios and invited me out there so that I could actually see what movie studios were all about and what it was we were doing. And it was an invaluable lesson. I learned things I never knew before because, of course, I wasn't in film. We had, as you can see, the first picture on the upper left is the entrance from the public way at the Venetian Hotel, and below it is a view looking into the dining rooms from the public bar area entrance, the lounge area at the front. When you look through these big stage doors, which were scenic soundstage doors, essentially, you could see the yellow, which is the back of this Gold Diggers backdrop stage. In the Gold Diggers area, if you're standing facing the stage and you turned around and faced the other way, you saw this beautiful trompe-l'oeil painting of this spiral staircase. And that was the Gold Diggers room from the very famous movie from, I believe, 1929. I'm not 100% sure. Forgive me. Another room was Casablanca, dedicated to Rick's Cafe in the movie Casablanca. You can see the lighting that's coming from above, the 5Ks that are coming from above. Well, these are not real 5Ks. I was able to find a studio, actually a studio outlet in Hollywood that had shells. And so I was able to purchase a myriad of 5K shells, retrofit them at Warner Brothers with incandescent lights, get them ETL into code so that we actually could have dimming lights that would illuminate, that would fit the code in the building system, but gave the look of theatrical that we were looking for. Here's another room, which is Ocean's 11, which was for those of you that know the history of the Venetian Hotel, it's built on the property of what was once the Sands. And the Sands was that famous hotel in the 50s where the original, gang had the movie Ocean's 11. It was Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford. They were the original Rat Pack, and they were from the Sands, and so it was very fitting that one of the rooms in our restaurant was Ocean's 11 as an homage to that. I've put these two pictures to the right in so that you can see on the left, on the bottom, one of the different views of the Ocean's 11 room, and on the top, the Casablanca room, but both showing the green beds. A green bed is something I learned about when I was in Hollywood, and that's typically what they use in the sound stages to light the set. You don't ever see light, so they have these things called green beds, and they are mounted above, and that is pretty much what they look like for a movie with movie lighting. And we had them fabricated so that we wanted to give the feel that you were in a sound stage. And this was how we did it, with these retrofitted theatrical 5Ks that were hanging off green beds. The last room was Gotham, and Gotham was special to Ed because Ed Strang was also the art director on the Batman movies. You can see from this center photo just how big the Medusa frieze is on the right photo, with this man who was one of the artisans who was working on it, as it's more than life-size. It was a 2-story room. I've shown a couple of construction pictures on the left so that you can see there were the gargoyles and the facades and all of the interesting 3-dimensional gargoyles and things really wrapped around this room. And again, my challenge was, how was I to light them? I called on my neon expert, my neon designer, Pat Nash, and we actually created essentially a parabolic lighting fixture using neon that was able to sit in a little 3-inch pocket at the edge of these I-beams and uplight these gargoyles. And so in the picture on the right, if you can see on the top, that kind of pinkish light where my cursor is, that is from those neon effects. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and you can see the uplighting on Medusa, which will show it right here. The uplighting on Medusa, I used an exterior fixture. I used an exterior in-grade architectural landscape lighting fixture because I needed to bury my lights. I needed something that could take the heat and the confinement. And again, there was no theatrical light that could do that. But the architectural world did provide me with landscape lighting that solved that. I believe Kim was the manufacturer of those in-grades. Here's some more pictures of Gotham, and you can see just how intricate some of the artwork was that went into it. I've got a naked picture of one of the gargoyles on the top, kind of juxtaposed in the center here, and on the right you can see the finished product of the gargoyle. We had all kinds of lighting everywhere, highlighting from within, from without, uplighting. Everything was kind of hidden, so it really did look like a movie set. We didn't want to see the fixtures, we wanted to see the effect of the fixtures. I was very privileged to be asked to join the team of Jerry Kugler and Mark Kubicki from then Kugler Tilliston lighting design firm, as they were working on Thorne Dining Hall at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. I have to give kudos here also to Gary Delansky. Gary Delansky is an architectural rep, predominantly known as a controls guy. And way back in the wee days of when Dallas began with their architectural endeavor, it was Gary, I think, who introduced New York City, for sure, to the possibilities of automation in architecture with this new architectural line and with this new control system. And when you fast forward a few years to when Jerry and Mark were working on this design at Thorne Hall, what they kind of found out at the 11th hour after this was all designed with these beautiful color kinetics, light color changing fixtures that were on these birds, these sculptures that were to mimic birds in the ceiling, the design intent could not be accomplished by existing control. And so in stepped Gary Delansky and ETC and their new playback controller, their ETC LPC, where we could actually bring in a theatrical console, upload the cues to a playback controller that actually had a few push buttons on the front, and then the facility could then have the control to recall cues. This was not only a dining hall, it was going to be used as a party hall. You had regular ambient lighting, obviously, for the daytime and for the dining functions, but they wanted to use it as a party space, as an entertainment space. I had some slow moving color cues. We had some almost disco-like fast dance cues at different tempos, so that it was a very multi-purpose hall for them. Here's a few illustrations of photos of how we were able to program all of these lights individually. I think there were maybe 12 lights per bird. And you could see we had various combinations of colors, and we could scroll and move them. And you know, your programming, as you all know, those of you who program, you're only as limited really as your imagination. Even if your equipment limits you, you can be clever enough to figure a roundabout and it go around. Another photograph of the birds, the sculpture, you can see up in the ceiling our color kinetics fixtures that were in a soffit, and very proud to have been included in the Lumen Award that was awarded to this project. And I don't know if I mentioned or not, but Gary Delansky was at that time the ETC rep, and we respecified, again, with his guidance. I'm going to move forward about to the mid-2000s. So I would say I'm moving forward about 12 or 15 years after the Lumen Award and Thorne Hall. And I was hired to collaborate with Matthew Tershwell of Tershwell and Company Lighting Design on Bowlmore. They were doing a large installation in Times Square, I think 50 bowling lanes. They were doing 2 party spaces. There was going to be, again, an element of theater that wasn't just straight bowling. It was going to be a bit of fantasy. There were themed areas throughout. You could go to a Chinese area. You could go to a 42nd Street area, a la, you can see Little Pussycat here in the middle top photograph. Matthew embraced the colored lighting, LED color changing technologies, and had Boca Flasher, an architectural lighting manufacturer, do a custom 6-channel fixture, which had our red, green, blue, warm white, cool white, and amber. So it was a 6-color lighting fixture that was custom made. Now, by the mid-2000s, we had a transition where theatrical lighting companies were adding architectural divisions, as in Martin, which had its architectural division, ADJ and Elation, which had Acclaim, their architectural division, ETC, which now had Iridian and its architectural division, and on and on. And at the same time, you had the architectural companies that were now embracing the theatrical technology. You had an architectural company like a Bokeh Flasher that heretofore had only dealt with white light, now dealing with colored light. So it was nice because we were getting this little marriage. We were all learning from each other. We were all absorbing from each other. And I think collectively, as a discipline, we were moving forward into and embracing the new technology. I did use a myriad of fixtures, and my control in this installation was mosaic. It gave me the most options, the most control. And interesting to note, this was also a Crestron dimming system, but now in 2013, Crestron had DMX. So we could have everything that was absolutely integrated into this system, whereas I couldn't do it in 1997 with the Mondrian Hotel. Another job that I did with Matthew, and I will say that I continue to program and be a consultant for the owners, Bolson Restaurant Group out in Long Island, is Monsoon Restaurant. Monsoon, the building on the upper left you can see is a very beautiful old building. It used to be the Bank of Babylon. And it was converted to this really wonderful upscale Asian restaurant. And part of the intent of the owners was, as you see, the center bottom picture is the lounge and dining area, and the far right photo is also looking down into this dining area and the bar area, which after the dinner hour was over, the dining tables were moved away. Everything was pushed back. They had a DJ in. They had a very beautiful ladies who were DJs. And they provided dancing, and they turned it into a bit of a club. So for them, all of these lights in there, and as you can see the picture of me standing in front of these red, green, and blue grids, all of those wanted to become now a kinetic light show. The photograph on the bottom left shows another annexed lighting room, which was predominantly white, but also we had the same color changing fixtures in there. So when that became a party space, we could then turn that into a nightclubby atmosphere. I used, again, mosaic for my control on that. It was integrated into a Crestron system. At that time, we had everything now on iPads. We're talking 2016-ish, 2015-ish. We had everything integrated into iPads. We had a iPad controller for the Crestron system. We could tag that right into and integrate into that some of our presets that we had from our Mosaic programming system. And it was really kind of the way to go on that. But one of the things that was even more unique about Monsoon was that I was at the time, and still am, living in Hollywood, Florida. And we had the ability, using the Mosaic processors, to dial up each processor individually and monitor it, change it, or upload programs into it. So theoretically, Kurt could call me on a Monday, tell me he had a party at the restaurant that Friday night that required special lighting for whatever reason. And he told me what he wanted it to be. I could write those cues in my laptop at my office. I could verify them through visualization on my laptop in the lighting software. I could then call up, dial in the processor that was on the premises of the restaurant, upload the new program, test it, and then the owner had it for their party a few days later, within a couple of days of telling me that they wanted these new looks. So that was kind of unique and interesting, and again, a development of technology that allowed us to do even more than we could a year before. during the late 2000, I would say 15 until recent years, I moved to Florida. I was doing consulting work, as I said, with Monsoon, with some of the other restaurants that Bolson Restaurant Group has. I did some work again out on Fire Island with the Pines, and I have been very, very proud to say that in 2018, while I celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Lumen Awards and the IES New York chapter, I also celebrated my 20th year of doing lighting for those Lumen Awards in New York, which was just amazing and wonderful. I spent a few years, 3 years, working with Acclaim Lighting as a special project support person. And oddly enough, my music career has had a rebirth, and it's kind of bit me in the ass in recent years. I was asked to be a consultant on the Studio 54 documentary, which is the name, Studio 54, the documentary, directed and produced by Matt Treinauer, Corey Reeser, and Altimeter Films. And it is available on Netflix for any of you who do want to see it. It's a great documentary. Matt is a wonderful documentarian, and I was very, very proud to have been asked to be a consultant on the soundtrack and work very closely with their music director, Liz Gallagher, their musical supervisor. And I was very pleased at the premiere to see that I've been given a lovely credit as well. Here's a couple of photographs. We had our world premiere at Sundance Music Festival, at Sundance Film Festival, which was just really quite amazing to stand on the red carpet with everyone from the film, or as they called it in Sundance, the snow carpet. I also had the pleasure of doing some work with SiriusXM, most notably a town hall that we did a couple of years ago where I was the moderator and have been dubbed by SiriusXM their nightlife historian, a badge I proudly wear to this day. And as you can see, I've had a lot of wonderful times having these lovely friends of mine, Bobby Vitoriti, myself, Robbie Leslie, Sharon White, and Tony King, Tony Smith, who is in the top right photo, and below that, our panel. These people were friends that I met back in the 70s in my days in the music business, and it's just such a pleasure to recount some of the history of what we did back then and how it really all works together. If we didn't have the music, we wouldn't have had the lights. If we didn't have the light show, we wouldn't have had the emphasis to the music that created so much more in the room. So it really has been an honor to be involved with them and with Sirius XM. And also, most recently, to be involved with the Brooklyn Museum and work with Matthew Yakubowski, the curator, on their latest exhibit, Studio 54 Night Magic. It just closed last Sunday on the 8th of November. It will be touring for the next few years. Its next stop is in Toronto. After that, I'm not sure the cities. Hopefully it will come to a city near you. It does, for you lighting geeks, it does have some very interesting lighting elements. They've got a lot of original blueprints, a lot of original excerpts and talks. Jules Fisher was the lighting designer of record at Studio 54, and Mark Kruger, and they've supplied a lot of their documentation from the lighting system. And also there is another room that is annexed off of the last room of the exhibit, and that features the Palladium, and it very interestingly has some of the original blueprints and Itsuzaki's architectural models of the insert that he placed inside the skeleton of the Academy of Music or Palladium building. And that's really of interest, any of you lighting people. It's a wonderful exhibit. It covers not only the music of the day, which I very proudly was produced with Robbie Leslie, the soundtracks to the ambient music that's played in all of the 3 rooms of the exhibit. I also loaned these artifacts that you see here to the exhibit for historical note of the music end. and the DJs, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of great fashion. It's just really a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. I hope if it comes to a city near you, you take the time and give it a look. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. And most recently, what sprang out of a production industry happy hour that's put together by my dear friend Marcel Fairbairn and Gears of Gear. We came up with a committee of 10 that, following in the footsteps of the UK's We Make Events and Red Alert program that they did, we came up in August, on August 11th, we came up with our own committee. I was one of the founding 10 that started the alert of Red Alert Restart and We Make Events here in North America. We did a huge campaign where we lit it all red on September 1st. I'm sure many of you may have even participated in it. We had, I think, over 3,000 venues, homes, structures lit all across the country. We did a live stream. It is available on YouTube as well. It was followed up just this past Tuesday with another push to action. And that's the latest endeavor that I've been involved with very, very proudly. And I'm sure that we're going to be hearing a lot more of the We Make Events people, as this is now becoming a global initiative, and it's good for all of us. So I'm very, very proud to be involved with this endeavor. And I think that takes me up to where I am today.
We do have some questions if you have time, Marsha.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all very much for listening and for your patience.
Perfect. The first question is Ice Palace 57 related to Ice Palace in Cherry Grove?
Yes, they were both owned by the same owner, Jimmy Merry. Ice Palace in Cherry Grove was built in the early 70s, and in 1977, Jimmy Merry took over and built the facility where the Ice Palace 57 was, on the corner of 57th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan, Avenue of the Americas, and absolutely owned by Jimmy.
Great. The next question is, how many channels of control did the Light Lab controllers have, and how did you run lights on them?
Well, it varied. It started with a 4-channel controller, and the first 4-channel controller had sliders. And I personally believe that it was my little converted typewriter console from the cock ring that gave the push a button, get a light innovation wings, so to speak, because within a couple of years, Light Lab had added push buttons to their 4-channel controller. So you now could not only set a level with a fader, but you could push a button, get a light, and play it like it was a keyboard, which was becoming more and more predominant in a lot of lighting controls. You had a company that had a keyboard that was relays, where you had maybe 3 or 4 banks of maybe 18 relays that were metallic touchpads that your body heat would set off. Light Lab had from anywhere from a 4-channel controller to a 64-channel controller. So there was a myriad of them, but I think 64 channels was about as max as it got in the late 70s, early 80s.
Perfect. The next question is, I see a book in the background about Studio 54. Can you talk about that?
Yes, actually, I'll slip to the side a little. That book is put together by Matthew Yokobowski and the museum. It is available online if you go to brooklynmuseum.org. It's a wonderful coffee table book of the exhibit, the Studio 54 Night Magic exhibit, and it really is a marvelous, marvelous book. Also important to note, since the closing of Studio 54, the Ian Schrager, Steve Rebell years, Ian has been reticent to speak about anything regarding Studio 54 for about 40 years. The first time he opened his mouth and told stories was to Matt for the documentary that he did for Altimeter Films. The second time that Ian shared was with Matthew Yokobowski and the exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. And I know that the Brooklyn Museum is very, very dear to Ian, and it really is a pleasure to be involved with both of these projects. That book is available, as I said, through the Brooklyn Museum. It's a fabulous coffee table pictorial book.
Perfect. The next question is, in your experience, how has the performance of the lighting and DJ's music changed from disco days with limited tech to clubs of today with the latest in lighting and control technology? Has the artsy changed at all over the years? Artistry, sorry.
Well, in my humble opinion, I think we had more personal contact and relationships with the DJs and the music when we had less technology. It seemed to be more guttural. It wasn't that it wasn't that we don't embrace the technology, but I think that the construct of how you get from point A to point B is a little lost. I'll give an example. When I wanted to make the Verilight's fan at the Palladium, I had to program each and every light and each and every step, and it was a long process and it was an arduous process, but it led me to understand the elements of building the cue and how I could get from point A to point B. That was before there was a fan button or a flash button. On modern consoles, you don't have to think about how you do it. You just push the effects button and there it is. So I think that kind of takes away from the emotional investment into the playback, and I think that the relationship between the DJ and the lighting person is an integral part of the show. I notice in most of the festivals and outside of clubs, and to be honest, I really don't do a lot of clubbing these days, but in most of the larger festivals and EDM fests and most of the larger clubs I go to lately, there is a separation. You have your DJs on stage, but the lighting people are front of house. Well, how do you really communicate with the DJ when you're in the front of house position and you're in essentially an arena? So I think that's a negative. By the same token, the technology of what the lighting people are able to do with their presets, with the computer, with the computerized control and the consoles, it far surpasses what we were able to do with push a button, get a light.
Great. The next question is, do you prefer to use theatrical fixtures in your design, or you move to specific architectural fixtures only?
I tend to use, well, let me clarify, I really don't do architectural lighting design in its purest form. If I was reliant on fluorescence and downlights, I would not be a lighting designer. But the fact that I could take my entertainment and theatrical lighting and put it into an architectural environment gave me an opportunity to work within architecture, or what we now know as Architainment. I will tend to go to a theatrical fixture first, because usually that's the task that I've been given by the designer that I may be working with, or the reason that I got that job in the first place. It wasn't because I was good at fluorescence and downlights. It was because I was good with implementing theater into architecture. And as I said, now we have theatrical companies that are producing entire divisions and making theatrically based lighting fixtures that are made specifically for architecture. So you really don't even have to choose anymore.
Perfect. The next question is, how does Architainment work with life safety lighting and general room lighting? Are they separate designs or all part of the same?
Ideally, they're all part of the same. Before DMX was integrated into architectural systems, absolutely they were separate. And within the architectural system was where you had your emergency lighting control and all the fail-safes and all of that stuff. And I would maybe have just a kill switch if there, God forbid, was a problem that came from the main power. It didn't come from my architectural playback unit at all. Excuse me. Nowadays, we've got much more of an integrated system. I don't have to worry so much about the emergency lights, the exit lights, those sorts of things. That's not really part of my purvey as the art as the entertainment aspect or the theatrical aspect of the lighting, but it is definitely now these days integrated into the overall dimming system, the building system that does have control of that, and they will shut me down in an emergency because that's what they do.
Perfect. The next question is there anything from the old days that you wish you still had with today's technology in regards to fixtures or controls?
I'm a bit of a pack rat, so I still have an old pin spot from the 70s. I still have a bag of spare parts, wheels, and color dichroic colors from my Verilight VL1s. And I think that we've got technology now that we need in today's world. I don't think that a bank of Light Lab lighting controllers or a Martin 518 playback unit or any of these units that were great in the 70s and 80s, I just don't think they'd pass muster today. I think we've gone beyond that. And I don't know that I would say that any of them were ones I would want to take with me to a show that I may do today. I think that the only thing possibly I could say is maybe a whole hog, and it's still around too.
Perfect. We have a couple more. So the next one is the lit stairs at the Palladium were also famous. What did they do and how were they controlled?
You're talking about the glass block staircase, I'm assuming, and it was an architectural element. They were glass blocks. I wish I had one here to show you. Actually, I have a couple of glass blocks, and they're architectural glass blocks, just like you would find at any home store or any interior store. In fact, these were actually I do have one, excuse me. Can you all see? This is a glass block from the Palladium. And what you saw was the glass block, and behind it were lights, and it was just simple architectural lighting that uplit these glass blocks that filled that staircase. And there was nothing else that they did. They were just on. It was not a light show. There were no colored lights. There were no fancy bells and whistles. It was definitely an artistic statement.
Very cool. So the next one is, how often does Architainment design make use of today's automated lights?
I think frequently. I mean, we've got the Intercontinental Hotel in downtown Miami that's had a lady dancing on the side of that building for at least the last 10 years that I'm aware of. We've got look at the beautiful lighting and projection and all of the now video almost and media server technology that's available on the Empire State Building, on bridges. I think that it's very pervasive, and I think part of the reason is that the architectural community embraced our color changing technology and our video and being able to pixelate images, and they embrace that technology as their own. And I think it is pervasive because of that. People realize it's really cool and I can do this too.
Perfect. So it looks like we have one more question. What modern trends are you seeing in clubs or Architainment that relate back to the early days?
That's a hard question, because other than nostalgia and perhaps noting and remembering history and knowing how we got from there to here, I don't see a lot of new installations that are saying, hey, let's go use some old stuff because it was really cool back then. I see that we're embracing the future and we're going forward with new technology. So I'm not sure if the old technology is useful as a tool as much as it's useful as a building block and a source of knowledge of knowing where we came from. Because you know the old saying, if you don't know where you came from, you'll never know where you're going.
Perfect. That looks like all the questions we have. I want to thank you, Marsha, for your time today. The session was great. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you guys again from Martin. This was really special. Thanks again for asking.
Thank you, Marsha. That was great.
I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye.
Stay safe. Thank you. Bye.